For over 5 decades, the world believed it knew Kurt Russell, the fearless action hero, the charming leading man, the boy from Disney who grew up before our eyes. But behind the smiles, the iconic roles and the Hollywood spotlight, there was a life few truly understood. For 30 years, rumors, hoaxes, and speculation suggested he was living a double life, hiding secrets that could shock the world. Some whispered about secret families, hidden careers, or shadowy adventures, while others insisted that the quiet actor was untouchable for reasons no one could name. This video unravels the truth, revealing the life Kurt Russell actually lived, disciplined, private, and intentional in every choice. We explore a man who refused to perform for fame and whose every private decision was misread as mystery. Far from scandalous or secretive, Russell's hidden life was a reflection of his values: integrity, family, personal growth, and independence. Long before the rumors, long before the questions, long before the silence itself became suspicious, Kurt Russell was just a toddler standing on television sets he was too young to understand. He was born on March 17, 1951, in Springfield, Massachusetts, into a life that was already leaning toward the camera. His father, Bing Russell, was an actor, not a megastar, but a working professional who understood the rhythm of auditions, rejections, scripts, and small victories. His mother, Louise Julia Russell, balanced the structure of family life with the unpredictability of the entertainment world. By the time Kurt could form complete memories, the family had already relocated to California. Hollywood wasn't a dream in his household. It was simply the neighborhood. At 12 years old, while most children were still struggling through schoolyard identities, Kurt stepped in front of a professional camera for the first time. There was no explosion of fame. No instant stardom. Just a quiet beginning in television. Small roles, background appearances, learning what it meant to take direction, hit marks, and wait patiently while adults built a world around him. The strange thing about child actors is that they grow up in reverse. The world knows their faces before they know themselves. Their identities are shaped under observation, not privacy. And for Kurt, the stage did not feel like an invasion. It felt like home. But even then, something set him apart. He wasn't chasing attention. He wasn't hungry for applause. He didn't behave like a boy desperate to be seen. He behaved like someone already watching, rather than being watched. At just 10 years old, he signed a long-term contract with Walt Disney Studios. It was a rare honor. Disney did not gamble on children. They molded them. And for years, Kurt Russell became one of the studio's most reliable young faces, appearing in film after film as the clean-cut, dependable American boy. On screen, he was everything parents trusted and studios loved. Courageous, light-hearted, predictable. But behind the scenes, the weight of expectation grew heavier each year. Being a child star is not the fairy tale the public imagines. Every smile is scheduled. Every mistake is magnified. Every decision is filtered through contracts, public image, and adult agendas. Kurt was learning responsibility at an age when most children were learning freedom. Yet even as his face became familiar across the country, he kept something rare for Hollywood: a sense of quiet neutrality. He did not rebel. He did not collapse. He did not grow arrogant. There were no wild headlines. No explosive behavior. No early warning signs of instability. To the outside world, his childhood looked perfect. But perfection itself can be a kind of burden. While other children learned who they were in private, Kurt learned who he was in front of millions. Every role added a layer to the character the world believed he was becoming. The public image began to crystallize early: disciplined, dependable, safe. And perhaps for the first time, without realizing it, he was already learning one of the most important skills that would define his life: how to separate what the world sees from what it never will. Even in those early years, there were hints that his future would not follow a simple path. Outside of acting, Kurt discovered another love: baseball. Unlike acting, baseball demanded something different. No applause. No scripts. No audience beyond the field. Just skill, discipline, failure, and repetition. For a while, baseball wasn't just a hobby. It was a second dream. Two paths began forming side by side. One illuminated by camera lights. One hidden behind dusty diamonds and quiet practice. And though no one could have known it at the time, that quiet split, between public identity and private passion, would later become the foundation for everything people would misunderstand about him. He was still a child. But the seeds of two worlds were already planted. By the early 1960s, Kurt Russell was no longer just a child appearing occasionally on television. He was becoming one of the most carefully shaped young actors in Hollywood under the powerful protection of Walt Disney Studios. Disney did not simply offer him roles, they crafted a public identity around him, turning him into the dependable, clean-cut, all-American boy that parents trusted and studios approved of without hesitation. Films like The Computer Wore Tennis Shoes, The Horse in the Gray Flannel Suit, and Now You See Him, Now You Don't made his face a familiar comfort in millions of homes. But behind that cheerful image was a child carrying adult expectations long before he fully understood what that meant. The studio controlled not only the characters he played but also how he spoke in interviews, how he dressed in public, and how his behavior reflected the Disney brand itself. Mistakes were not merely personal errors, they were financial liabilities. While other children learned who they were through trial and privacy, Kurt learned who he was under constant observation and professional discipline. What looked like effortless charm on screen was built on tightly scheduled days, relentless responsibility, and the quiet understanding that his value extended far beyond his own childhood. Yet through it all, he never rebelled publicly, never collapsed, never created the scandals that often followed other child stars, and his discipline made him reliable but also strangely difficult to read, planting the earliest seeds of mystery around a boy who seemed too controlled for his age. Leaving Disney in the 1970s was not simply a career shift for Kurt Russell, it was a dangerous gamble that risked erasing him from Hollywood entirely. Disney had been his safety net, his identity, and his professional backbone since childhood, and few actors who broke away from that system ever found their footing again. Yet without dramatic announcements, without public conflict, and without scandal, he quietly stepped away from the studio that made him famous, creating immediate speculation in an industry that mistrusts silence. For a period, his name faded from major headlines, his roles became smaller, and the public wondered whether his success had simply ended. In reality, he was rebuilding himself away from the spotlight while pursuing something that had nothing to do with Hollywood at all: baseball. He trained seriously, competed fiercely, and in 1973 signed with a minor league team in the California Angels organization as a second baseman, proving that this was not a publicity stunt but a genuine second career attempt. For a moment, it nearly worked, and his progress suggested that professional sports could become his new life, until a devastating shoulder injury abruptly ended the dream almost as quietly as it had begun. There were no dramatic interviews or televised heartbreaks, only a silent collapse of a future that never reached the public's full attention, leaving behind a sense that pieces of his life existed far outside what fans ever saw. When Kurt Russell re-entered the public eye in the early 1980s, he did so in a way that completely erased the image Disney had built around him, and the transformation was so extreme that many audiences barely recognized him. His role as Snake Plissken in Escape from New York announced the death of the polite Disney boy and the birth of a hardened anti-hero who distrusted authority, broke rules, and survived without apology. The collaboration with director John Carpenter reshaped his career with films like The Thing and Big Trouble in Little China, each pushing him further into the territory of gritty, unpredictable masculinity. This was no sanitized hero crafted for children's matinees, but a flawed, dangerous man designed for adult audiences, and the shift stunned both fans and critics alike. As his on-screen identity grew more intense and untamed, his off-screen personality became more guarded and private. He pulled back from the media rather than leaning into the fame that now surrounded him, choosing distance over exposure and control over chaos. The more elusive he became, the more people felt that they no longer understood him, and in that growing space between visibility and privacy, speculation began to bloom quietly but persistently. In 1983, while filming Swing Shift, Kurt Russell met Goldie Hawn, and what might have become another dramatic Hollywood romance instead evolved into one of the quietest and most enduring partnerships in the entertainment industry. At a time when both had already experienced the damage that fame could inflict on personal relationships, they made a decision that puzzled the public for decades. They chose not to marry. Not as a rejection of commitment, but as a way to protect it from becoming a performance. Together, they built a blended family that included Goldie's daughter Kate Hudson and later welcomed their son Wyatt Russell, choosing to raise their children far from the center of Hollywood attention whenever possible. They lived between California and Colorado, limited their exposure in tabloids, and shielded their private life with rare discipline in an industry addicted to exhibition. Their stability, longevity, and refusal to follow celebrity routines confused the public more than endless scandals ever could have, because Hollywood conditions audiences to expect disorder, breakups, and emotional explosions. Instead, Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn quietly remained together while marriages around them collapsed in public view, and that very normalcy in a world that feeds on chaos began to look suspicious in the eyes of rumor culture. By the late 1980s and into the 1990s, the media landscape itself had changed, and with it, the way stories were created, exaggerated, and consumed. Tabloid culture was exploding, fueled by supermarket headlines, paparazzi competition, and a growing appetite for scandal, and celebrities who refused to provide drama often found it manufactured for them instead. Kurt Russell, with his disciplined privacy and refusal to participate in celebrity excess, became an unusually quiet figure in a very loud industry, and that silence created a vacuum the tabloids were eager to fill. stories began circulating about supposed secret affairs, hidden feuds, private conflicts with studios, and even alleged second families, all presented with dramatic language but supported by no verifiable evidence. None of these claims were ever proven, and none were backed by direct testimony, yet the repetition itself began to create a shadow version of his life that some readers accepted simply because they kept seeing it. Unlike stars who publicly fought rumors with interviews and courtroom battles, Kurt rarely responded at all, and his refusal to engage was interpreted by certain corners of the gossip world not as dignity, but as confirmation. Over time, the idea quietly settled in the minds of some fans that he might be hiding something significant, not because of what had been proven, but because of what had allegedly been whispered often enough to feel real, marking the first serious stage where the myth of a double life began to take recognizable form. As the internet rose in the late 1990s and early 2000s, rumors no longer needed printed headlines to spread, and the speed at which false information traveled suddenly outpaced any attempt at correction. Kurt Russell became an unexpected target of repeated viral death hoaxes, with fabricated news reports claiming he had died in accidents, illnesses, or mysterious circumstances that had never occurred. Each wave of false reports spread rapidly through email chains, early blogs, and later social media platforms, often convincing thousands of people before being debunked hours or days later. The sheer number of these hoaxes created confusion even among fans who thought they were following legitimate news, and every false death announcement fed into a growing sense that nothing about his public narrative was completely stable. Internet conspiracy culture, which thrives on patterns and repetition, began to weave these random hoaxes into broader imaginary storylines suggesting hidden identities, staged disappearances, and secret withdrawals from public life. None of these theories were supported by credible journalism or evidence, yet the viral nature of the web meant that a lie repeated fast enough could feel as solid as truth. For the first time, the myth surrounding Kurt Russell was no longer being built only by tabloids but by anonymous users, message boards, and rumor forums, and in that digital fog, fans began to genuinely question what was real anymore. Long before the internet rumors and tabloid whispers ever existed, Kurt Russell had already lived a chapter of his life that most fans would not fully discover until much later, and that was his serious pursuit of professional baseball. In the early 1970s, while many assumed he was quietly waiting for the next acting opportunity, he was instead training and competing in the minor league system of the California Angels organization as a second baseman, fully committed to building a future that had nothing to do with Hollywood stardom. This was not a ceremonial role or a celebrity publicity move, as he traveled with the team, practiced under demanding conditions, and faced the same physical risks and career uncertainty as every other aspiring athlete. For a brief period, his development suggested a legitimate chance of advancing further, until a severe shoulder injury abruptly ended his baseball career in 1973, closing that path almost instantly and without fanfare. Because this entire chapter unfolded largely outside the spotlight, many fans did not learn about it until decades later, and when they did, it shocked them to realize how close he had come to living a completely different life. For those already primed by rumor culture, this discovery became another piece of the puzzle that seemed to support the myth, prompting the lingering question that would echo for years afterward. If this part of his life had remained hidden in plain sight for so long, what else might the public not know about him? Long before many fans ever discovered it, Kurt Russell had quietly earned another identity that existed far from movie sets and red carpets, one that involved sky charts instead of scripts and control panels instead of cameras. He became a licensed pilot, not casually, but with the same discipline that defined every other serious commitment in his life, training rigorously and logging real flight time rather than treating aviation as a celebrity hobby. Over the years, he flew his own aircraft privately, often transporting his family and friends, choosing the solitude of the sky over the spectacle of public travel, and keeping this aspect of his life almost completely detached from publicity. On rare occasions, stories surfaced through interviews and second-hand accounts suggesting that he had handled difficult in-flight situations with calm precision, but these moments were never dramatized by him nor aggressively promoted by the media, remaining quiet anecdotes rather than viral legends. To fans who later learned about his life as a pilot, the contrast was striking, an A-list Hollywood actor also operating complex aircraft out of public view. For those already influenced by rumor culture, this discovery felt like further proof that entire layers of his existence were unfolding beyond the public's awareness, reinforcing the idea that he lived parallel realities not because he was hiding something dark, but because he simply preferred a life that did not require constant explanation. While many stars of his era became inseparable from the nightlife of fame, Kurt Russell consistently chose a different route, one marked by remarkable absence from the very events that defined celebrity culture. He rarely attended the endless parties, launch events, and social gatherings that dominated Hollywood networking, and when he did appear at major occasions, it was usually with purpose rather than performance. There were no viral club outings attached to his name, no regular paparazzi trails following him through late-night scenes, and no cycles of public misbehavior followed by staged redemption. In an industry where visibility often equates to relevance, his distance created an unusual silence around his personal life. He did not feed gossip columns with feuds, meltdowns, or tabloid relationships, and his consistent refusal to participate in public chaos made him difficult to categorize. Over time, that absence began to feel like presence itself, because every celebrity is expected to be seen somewhere, and Kurt Russell was frequently seen nowhere at all. For a media culture addicted to constant exposure, this lack of spectacle did not signal stability. Instead, it bred suspicion. Silence became interpreted as strategy, withdrawal became mistaken for concealment, and the simple choice to live privately was gradually reframed by outsiders as evidence that something unseen must be happening behind closed doors. As his career matured, Kurt Russell developed a professional reputation that quietly unsettled studio executives, not because he was volatile or unpredictable, but because he was independent in a way that Hollywood rarely fosters. He did not bind himself tightly to long-term, restrictive studio contracts in the traditional sense, instead choosing roles more selectively and often stepping away for extended periods when the material did not interest him. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he did not aggressively pursue award campaigns, red carpet dominance, or prestige positioning, preferring steady work over competitive visibility. This approach gave him a rare kind of leverage. He was successful enough that studios wanted him, but detached enough that he did not need to chase them. Behind closed doors, this made him difficult to manage in an industry built on control and compliance, and over time a quiet perception formed that Kurt Russell operated by his own internal rules rather than Hollywood's expectations. To outsiders, that independence sometimes felt like immunity, and rumor culture, always hungry for hidden explanations, twisted that autonomy into the narrative that he was untouchable for a reason. In truth, what made him resistant to control was not secrecy or scandal, but a rare consistency of self-direction in a machine that thrives on ownership. Even as Kurt Russell's career reached its peak, a quiet question lingered among insiders and colleagues. How well did anyone truly know him? The rumors that had begun in tabloids and on internet forums were amplified by the very nature of Hollywood, where distance and discretion are often misread as concealment. Industry professionals noted that while Kurt was courteous and professional on set, he rarely allowed himself to be fully known off camera, and some co-stars admitted that they barely glimpsed the private man behind the roles they shared. This separation created a subtle but tangible loneliness, because trust and familiarity in Hollywood often rely on visibility, gossip, and public vulnerability, all of which Kurt carefully avoided. His life, meticulously managed, became a paradox. The more visible he was as a professional, the less accessible he remained as a person, and the more rumors flourished, the greater the sense that the man behind the camera was unknowable. Over time, this invisible distance reinforced a perception that there must be more hidden beneath the surface, even when the truth was simply that he valued privacy over exposure. Kurt Russell's life became a battleground between expectation and reality, where the public projected desires, fantasies, and suspicions onto a figure who consistently refused to play along. Audiences assumed stories where none existed, interpreting his quiet demeanor as enigmatic or evasive rather than deliberate and protective. As the internet matured, these projections mutated into persistent rumors that spread through fan forums, message boards, and social media threads, often blending truth and conjecture so seamlessly that discerning fact from fiction became nearly impossible. This phenomenon illuminated a larger cultural pattern. The more mysterious a public figure becomes, the more people feel compelled to fill in the blanks with narratives of intrigue, scandal, or deception. What started as curiosity eventually bordered on obsession, as repeated speculation created its own momentum, and the line between genuine interest and manufactured drama blurred entirely. In the case of Kurt Russell, the contrast between his private life and public perception was never the result of intentional deception, but the mismatch between audience expectation and his desire for ordinary, undisturbed living created fertile ground for the double life myth to grow. Living under the constant assumption that one is hiding something exacts a subtle, enduring psychological toll, and for Kurt Russell, the effects of being misunderstood were as real as any physical demand of acting or flying planes. Silence, once chosen deliberately for privacy, was repeatedly misinterpreted as guilt, secrecy, or duplicity, forcing him to navigate a world in which his mere inaction could be read as evidence of hidden agendas. The stories that circulated about him were rarely created by him, yet they became part of the cultural weight he carried, shaping interactions, expectations, and even the way his colleagues approached him. Being perceived as secretive or enigmatic without ever having crafted the narrative oneself can breed an unusual kind of isolation, because trust is predicated on visibility, and Russell's carefully guarded life meant that much of the world assumed the worst. The cumulative effect of decades of misinterpretation was subtle but profound. The man who had consistently sought only normalcy, discipline, and privacy became a figure both admired and mystified, and the myth of a double life grew not because of what he was hiding, but because of what the world imagined when confronted with someone who lived openly yet quietly on his own terms. As journalists, biographers, and longtime industry observers began revisiting Kurt Russell's life in greater detail, the tangled web of rumors and supposed secrets slowly started to unravel under the weight of facts. Timelines were checked, dates verified, and events that had previously been distorted through repetition and assumption were clarified with first-hand accounts and documented evidence. Alleged affairs, hidden families, and dramatic scandals could not be substantiated, and every claim that had once fueled the double life narrative began to collapse when measured against reality. Slowly, it became clear that what had appeared to be secrecy was in fact consistent privacy, and what had been interpreted as evasiveness was actually intentional discretion. The myth that Kurt Russell had maintained a parallel existence for decades began to fade, replaced by an understanding that he had merely lived life on his own terms, refusing to perform for public consumption, and that the enduring fascination with a hidden life had been constructed entirely by those observing him from the outside. The elements of Kurt Russell's life that remained private throughout his career were not dark secrets or hidden scandals, but the quiet, disciplined choices that defined him as a person. He carefully prioritized his family, valuing long-term relationships over fleeting celebrity attention and raising his children with intentional privacy, shielding them from the glare of Hollywood wherever possible. He avoided the addiction to fame that ensnared so many peers, choosing steady, meaningful work over public validation or award campaigns, and he cultivated hobbies and skills, such as piloting aircraft and engaging in athletics, that satisfied personal goals rather than generating headlines. His private life reflected a conscious avoidance of spectacle and a commitment to self-direction, and the hidden aspects were therefore not mysterious in a sensational sense but profoundly ordinary in their intention. The truth was simpler than the myth suggested, yet deeper, revealing a man committed to integrity, family, and craft, who had never needed to explain himself to a world that preferred drama over consistency. In every instance, the reality of his life was far more compelling than the fabricated stories that had surrounded it. The persistence of the double life myth revealed as much about society as it did about Kurt Russell himself. People are naturally drawn to scandal and intrigue, and in an industry and culture that thrives on exposure, privacy is often interpreted as deception. Kurt Russell's deliberate withdrawal from tabloid spectacles, his refusal to air personal matters publicly, and his consistent choice to avoid celebrity excess created a vacuum that the public and media were eager to fill with imagined drama. Rumors about hidden affairs, secret achievements, or unknown families were not only improbable but also unnecessary. They existed because the world needed them to exist. The fascination with a hidden life says more about the audience than the subject, reflecting a collective desire to impose mystery onto a figure who did not conform to conventional patterns of fame. In that sense, the double life was never truly his to lead. It was a narrative projected onto him by a culture obsessed with scandal, reinforcing the uncomfortable truth that society often values intrigue over authenticity, and that a quiet, disciplined, and independent life can be perceived as the greatest mystery of all. After decades of speculation, rumor, and conspiracy, the evidence finally tells a clear story. Kurt Russell never lived a double life in the sense that fans and tabloids imagined. Every alleged secret, every whispered affair, every hidden family member, and every dramatic scenario that fueled decades of myth fails when measured against verifiable facts. The man who had been interpreted as enigmatic, elusive, or suspicious was in truth simply disciplined, private, and deliberate in his choices. His life was characterized by intentional boundaries, thoughtful decisions, and a rare focus on integrity rather than spectacle, which created the illusion of secrecy where none existed. The reality was that he had never hidden dark secrets, staged alternate identities, or led clandestine lives. What had seemed like a parallel existence was nothing more than a combination of carefully managed privacy, selective public exposure, and society's insatiable hunger for mystery. The irony is that the double life the world believed he maintained was never his to live. It was a narrative imposed upon him by expectation and imagination. In dismantling the myth, the truth emerges as both simpler and far more compelling. Kurt Russell lived one life, fully, deliberately, and authentically, even if it appeared from a distance to be many. Kurt Russell's life demonstrates a subtle but profound truth about fame, perception, and privacy. A quiet man in a loud industry can appear to be hiding everything simply by choosing not to perform for the cameras. His so-called mysteries were never fabrications, but reflections of a culture that confuses discretion with secrecy and normalcy with enigma. He lived intentionally, protected his family, pursued passions beyond public notice, and operated on his own terms, refusing to allow the world to dictate the contours of his existence. The misunderstanding that surrounded him reveals less about Kurt and more about the public's desire for drama, intrigue, and spectacle. Legends are often misunderstood not because they are dishonest, but because they resist the performance that society demands, and in Russell's case, the quiet, disciplined life he cultivated became, paradoxically, the most fascinating story of all. By choosing integrity over exposure, independence over conformity, and privacy over publicity, he created a life that was authentic yet inexplicably compelling, and the enduring fascination with him reminds us that true greatness is often measured not in the stories the world imagines, but in the life a person actually lives. Kurt Russell did not hide a second life, he lived one extraordinary life fully, and the only mystery is why the world ever expected him to show it in a way that could be fully understood.